Morning. So in a previous video, I talked a bit about an episode of Star Trek, and if you couldn't tell just by watching me kind of, go through the narrative of that particular episode, I'm a bit of a fan. Mostly Next Generation era style, to be actually TNG with Patrick Stewart, Picard, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. I think that was kind of Trek as its best. I mean, I like the original series. Mostly the movies with the original cast, I think, are more entertaining than the show itself. But I mean, you got to give props to the the original that kind of birthed the franchise. But I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of talk about law enforcement and how, in my mind, it relates to Star Trek. So when you get into law enforcement, you often get asked why, right? Why by friends and family? Why by people who are going through your applications and doing oral board interviews and panels, and then when you do get hired, you got icebreakers with like, well, why'd you get into this? And tell us a little bit about yourself. And so I remember in kind of a new hire training, that question being asked as an icebreaker, and everybody going around the room talking about their motivations and why they're here and what they want to accomplish, and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but also kind of not really. It's like, well, the reason I wanted to be a cop is because when I was a kid, I wanted to be captain of the Enterprise. And there are no Starship Enterprise, so this was kind of the closest attainable thing for me. Now, granted, if you want to get into something more like Starfleet and have the Starfleet experience, well, you can talk to my cousin Jason, who went to Annapolis, the Naval Academy, and he's in the Navy, and ultimately, it's much more analogous, directly speaking, than law enforcement. But there are some interesting parallels, and so I mean, people kind of chuckled or thought I was a little bit ridiculous for saying, well, I'm a cop because I wanted to be captain of the Enterprise. It's the next best thing. But I mean, it's literally true in some ways. So if you think about the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, I think he was actually both in the Navy and also in law enforcement in LA, I think, for a while. I could be wrong about it. I think he was actually a motor cop. And I think that's kind of telling about how the show works, and kind of the structure of it. And so on the one hand, you have the guy who was in the Navy, right? And all the, ships and technical stuff and real strict, military hierarchy and all that stuff, and just a lot of the tradition and lingo and things around that, right? And that's all kind of baked into Star Trek. And I mean, really, Trek is just like the Navy in space, right? But you think like classic Trek. Captain Kirk is the one going down to the planet on every away mission, I mean, you got like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, right, or whoever is on the away team, and then you like a couple expendable red shirts, right, and that is not the Navy, right? I mean, the captain of like an aircraft carrier, I mean, it's I think analogous to like a colonel in the Army, like it's the highest ranking like field officer in the branch, like before you get to admiral or general or something like that, right? And so, you're not going to have captain of the boat, going on every little away mission, and especially going into like direct, dangerous missions and having to carry a sidearm with him, right? And so, like, the away missions are very like chips, like a 60s cop TV show, and I think that's because that's what Roddenberry was drawing on when he was actually writing the show. It was not his naval experience, it was his law enforcement experience. And so when I get into my patrol car, and I was thinking about this tonight as I was working, I was starting at 9 p.m., so the sun's down, and I'm climbing into my patrol car, putting it in drive, and kind of launching out into the darkness of the void, like the Starship Enterprise, and not unlike Starfleet. And again, you think about Starfleet in the TV show, like, it's not strictly military. I mean, it kind of vacillates depending on which era of Trek you're talking about and what's going on at the time. I mean, they fight wars, right? So it's very military. But I mean, at its core, Starfleet doesn't want to be a military. They want to be a peacekeeping and humanitarian armada, right? I think is how it's put. Which, I mean, is definitely more law enforcement than military, right? In principle, like, I mean, if there's a peacekeeper and a helper, humanitarian, it's more like unto the police. And so as I launch into the void, and put my car in drive and get up to warp speed, and I'm exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations. Every call I go to, I mean, it's kind of like the next episode, the next away mission, and I don't know what kind of like just weirdness that I'm going to run into, or what interesting moral quandary or problem that I'm going to have to solve, and it's not unlike how, the crew of the Enterprise in whichever iteration, goes out and runs into these new situations and has to, kind of grapple with the problem at hand. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, right? And especially given that Trek, as opposed to Star Wars or other sci-fi fantasy stuff in the genre, you think, especially really contemporary stuff, so you got like Battlestar Galactica, or in the fantasy side, like Game of Thrones, and it's all very dark. It's got a very just negative take on humanity, people generally, and I mean it really leads into kind of that gritty sort of drama. And I mean, there's some of that in Trek, and sometimes when Trek was at its best, it was a little bit gritty and dramatic that way. And to the constant consternation of the writers, as long as Roddenberry was alive, he actually set rules about how they were going to write episodes, and there wasn't internal conflict with the crew, right? And he was trying to, show that humanity could move beyond its own petty disagreements and work together, right? But utopian idealism aside, what you got was a more optimistic outlook on our future, and I think that's what a lot of people like about Trek. It's fundamentally, I mean, even when things are dark, it's an optimistic story about that we tell ourselves about our future selves, right? And I think a lot of that is informed by that kind of law enforcement perspective, that we're not out to crush, kill, and destroy. No knock on our military brethren, but I mean, soldiers exist to fight the enemy, and to inflict damage, and yes, for the purpose of protecting and preserving things that are important. And to be sure, law enforcement also engages in violent activity from time to time, and that's part and parcel of Trek as well. I mean, but the notion of phasers on stun, right? Again, it's qualitatively different than maybe Star Wars, right? Where again, you've got this kind of grim future with a galactic empire, and I mean, hope is hard to come by, right? and so I think that's what attracted me in some ways about law enforcement. And when I say I wanted to be captain of the Enterprise, like I remember the feeling watching the show that if you worked hard, if you used your mind, if you cooperated well with your team, you could figure things out and overcome problems, and their problems had solutions, and that you could get positive outcomes that made a difference in people's lives by doing those things. And I think that's really true of law enforcement. And maybe I've said this before and I might be repeating myself, but I don't encourage people to get into law enforcement anymore. There was a time when I did, but despite the fact that I don't urge people to get into it, I still enjoy the job. I still find the job rewarding, and I still think that what I do matters. And I can't really imagine myself doing something else right now. I mean, at least for the time being. Because the things I deal with, the people I interact with, it actually does have a profound impact on their lives for, and hopefully in a positive way. And I think that's something we could all hold on to a little more, and maybe not get so sucked into the kind of, again, the gritty, dramatic take on life. That we can work together to solve our problems and make the world a little bit better, whether that's at the individual level or as a society. Star Trek is definitely a utopian ideal in many ways, and it's a post-scarcity society. Things like commodities and energy consumption, it's all kind of a moot point, right? Because they have matter energy replication, right? They can push a button and create, just based on energy output, whatever they need, food, clothing, whatever tools, just things that they want, right? So I mean, there's no real manufacturing work that needs to be done for most people, right? And the things that people do with their time, they do because they find value in them, and so that's very utopian, right? And people want to say that Trek is kind of this communist or socialistic system. I think it's well beyond kind of a capitalist communist dichotomy when you get into post-scarcity society. Now you're more talking about again the fundamental nature of humanity, and what motivates people to continue to do anything when they no longer have to work to subsist and maintain homeostasis. And again, people have some pretty dark takes on what becomes of humanity when we get there, right? I think it was H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, and he goes into the future, and you've got the Morlocks, right? The kind of subhuman species, and then these kind of perfect people that have nothing better to do than to lay around and play music, eat food, and procreate. And that's his kind of idea of what people far into the future might have to be like when they don't have to work anymore. But I mean, Trek says when we take care of the essential problems that people deal with, war, poverty, hunger, disease, that sort of stuff, and people are left to their own devices and to pursue their own values, what they end up doing is pushing the limits of our potential and striving out into the galaxy to learn all that is learnable, know all that is knowable, and improve ourselves and work for the betterment of not just ourselves, but for everybody around us, in the galactic sense, right? And maybe that's not totally true of humans, and certainly there are people who, given the opportunity, would be total miscreants if they didn't have to worry about things like money and subsisting. I mean, certainly you have examples of people who hit the lottery and I mean just ruins their life, right? Because they're not prepared for that, but I think that's more a consequence of us not having to think and prepare ourselves in terms of what do we do with our lives when our basic survival needs are met. And as we get into more affluent societies, and kind of more cognitive work than manual work, and we have this kind of malignant narcissism and just nihilism about life that is emerging in many people because they're lacking purpose, and they're kind of just listlessly drifting through life. But I mean, if we really oriented ourselves as a society around the idea of, what is it we're actually trying to accomplish here with our existence, right? And what goals can we set for ourselves to strive for as a species? I think those are important questions that we're, maybe not in my lifetime, but in our children's children's lifetime, we might have to start asking ourselves, right? Like, what do we want to decide our purpose for being is actually going to be? And what are we going to set out to do? What is going to be like the character and the nature of the human animal going into the future? If we do, contact alien civilizations like in Star Trek, like, are they going to be terrified of us as some, like barbaric, warlike people? Are we going to be like, just massively, collectivists, nightmare like the Borg, where we've erased all individuality? Are we going to be some awful authoritarian monstrosity like in Warhammer 40k and the God Emperor of Man ruling over the just endless billions of the Imperium? Or are we going to be the Federation? Are we going to seek out new life and stretch the boundaries of our knowledge and our abilities and make our mark on reality in a way that might be lasting for thousands of years, rather than bombing ourselves into oblivion? I don't know. Anyway, those are my thoughts for the day. Hopefully actually inspiring and uplifting. As always, it's been fun. See you on the next one.